Taught in high school for 10 years, and during that time I've given assignments to, among others, a murderer, a prize fighter, an evangelist, a thief, and an imbecile. I'm reading from a text from Naomi John White called "I Taught Them All," and she goes on to say, "The murderer was a quiet little boy who sat on the front seat and regarded me with pale blue eyes. The evangelist, easily the most popular boy in school, had the lead in the junior play. The prize fighter lounged by the window and let loose at intervals a raucous laugh that startled even the geraniums. The thief was a gay-hearted Lothario with a song on his lips, and the imbecile a soft-eyed little animal seeking the shadows. The murderer awaits death in a state penitentiary. The evangelist has lain a year now in the village courtyard. The pugilist lost an eye in a brawl in Hong Kong. The thief, by standing on tiptoes, can see the windows of my room from the county jail. And the once gentle-eyed little imbecile beats his head against a padded wall in the state asylum. All of these pupils once sat in my room and looked at me gravely across worn brown desks. I must have been a great help to them. I taught them the rhyming scheme of the Elizabethan sonnet and how to diagram a complex sentence." Now that's obviously Naomi White's criticism of teaching and the school system, and I myself was a high school teacher for 6 years, and I can identify with a great deal of that. The numbers of things that I was involved teaching, and I can think of myself taking a lot of those things, that as I look back on them now, I have a very difficult time knowing why and for what I expended all that energy for in studying certain things that I have literally never used again. And I think when we think about that, all of us can identify with it. I was told it's good mental discipline, and I don't buy that anymore. I think there's a lot of other ways that human creativity and exercising the mind and the creative part of myself could have been used. I'm not faulting the people that did it. They did the best they knew how to do. I'm sure it was the best choice they had available to them. But I think we come tonight to this fourth age, the age of going to school. Erikson says the crisis here is industry versus inferiority. And the ego strength that must be developed here is competence, a sense of competence, that I can start a job and finish it, that I have the feeling in my body of knowing what it means to be industrious, not necessarily to go into business or industry, but I know how to start a job and I know how to finish it. Now, there are a lot of educators. I see some among you in this audience who are already doing this at much earlier levels, allowing children to get into the kind of education where they have the sense, they get the sense of I can start a job and I can finish it. I know that I can do that. I have that sense of competence. In terms of these 8 stages that we are taking in this series, it is crucial in terms of the development of a healthy ego, a healthy personality, that a person have a sense of competence. And that's what we're dealing with tonight. Now, I reviewed quickly last week. I'll do it again. We've been talking about strengths that need to be developed as the foundation of a healthy, strong personality, ego. Next week we'll talk about identity, the identity crisis. And probably the pivotal point of a healthy personality is identity. I know who I am. I know what I can do. I know what my limits are. I know who I am. I know where I'm going. I know how I can relate to all of you. Now, I don't think identity is the end of healthy personality. I think we need more than identity And I'll be talking in the last 3 programs about going beyond identity. For example, when you love, you go beyond your ego, beyond your identity to someone else. When you generate and are productive and care for life, you go beyond your own ego. And I truly believe that you can't be a fully actualized, healthy person living only for yourself. And researchers like Erikson and Maslow and others, from a purely psychological point of view, agree with that. But what we want to look at then are these developmental stages that we've been talking about, these crises. Life is crisis. In order to grow, you have to overcome certain obstacles, certain crises. Trust versus mistrust, develop a sense of hope. Autonomy versus shame and doubt, a sense of willpower. Industry versus inferiority, autonomy versus initiative versus guilt, a sense of purpose, that I have a sense of knowing where I'm going, what we talked about last week, without being overridden with guilt or being filled with self-criticism or self-judgment or self-alienation. What we're saying is you have to have a sense of hope, a sense of willpower, a sense of purpose, and a sense, tonight we'll talk about a sense of competence, that I have the ability to complete a job once I start it. And this takes us into the school age. And really, when we enter the school age, we enter an entirely new universe. Much research has been done on this, and parents have often taken the rap for not okay children and low self-esteem and low self-worth. And there are researchers like Bill Glasser, who wrote Schools Without Failure, who believe that the villain is much more the school than it's ever been the family or the parents. There have been numerous articles written about the problem of failure in school and the damage that that does to the ego structure of a person. Somebody estimated that something like 90% of the 15,000 people in the Texas penitentiaries were school dropouts and school failures. And Glasser in California did a tremendous amount of work on this, showing how, see, when we all left home to go to school, we entered into an environment where we were no longer mama's little boy or mama's little girl. We were now in a competitive situation. And you see, one of the interesting things about this chart that Erikson has been developing is that what he's saying is it's not only do we need these ego strengths, but there are institutions in society that actually support each ego strength. For example, mothers and daddies usually have a faith, usually have a religious commitment. That supports hope and trust. Law and order supports willpower. Marriage and family supports purpose. And now we come to a time where we all had to move out of a world of fantasy and play to a world of learning how to work. So I am what I am given, I am what I will, I am what I imagine, and I am what I learn and know how to make. Those are the 4 kind of foundational pieces that next week, as we talk about going into puberty, going into adolescence and the identity crisis, it will be important to have developed. Now, just for a minute while I'm talking here, I want you to kind of let your minds drift back. There's a guy in California that does a thing called psycho-imagination therapy. And he says, if you want to know about your self-image, close your eyes and picture a classroom. Go to the first classroom scene you can find in your memories. Just do that for a second. And those of you at home watching, if you try that just for a moment, just close your eyes and let your mind drift back to school days and blackboards and teachers, and you're sitting in the classroom. Now, some of you are smiling. Some of you don't look like you're smiling, though. Somebody share with me? Did somebody get to a painful thing quickly there? Often people do. Some of you shaking your heads. You know the first thing I did the first time I did this? I saw a scene of the principal of the school I went to, which was a Catholic elementary school, throwing the report cards on the floor that had F's on them. And the children would have to grovel down and pick them up. Catholic priest. Real nice deal, right? You know, bless the man. I'm sure he thought that was the way to make people work harder. But think, I mean, I can remember those kids that would kneel down and pick those report cards up and walk back to their little desks. I bet you can all see the scene of some kid up at the blackboard and they can't work the problem out, and all the hands are waving. It's almost like, let's all get him, you know. And then little Herkimer comes up to the blackboard and little Farquhar goes back to his seat. And everybody sees little Herkimer work the problem, but think of that kid walking back to his seat. Think of the painful experience that that child has just been through. The public humiliation. And think of this almost what somebody's called the sheepskin psychosis. John Keats wrote a book called The Sheepskin Psychosis. I remember being in a grocery store hearing a mother talking to a kid that was about that high. The kid couldn't have been more than about the first or second grade. How do you think you're ever going to get into college with those grades? You know, this little dude was looking up like, you know, what in the world are you talking about? But you see, so much has been laid on us about, you know, I can remember a certain period in my life when I was selling life insurance, and boy, we'd lay it on people. Well, your kid will make $200,000 more in their lifetime if they get a college education. Don't you want to take this endowment policy? And sort of one of the big pitches. And many people who didn't go to school. In fact, there's almost a neurosis about people who didn't graduate from college. I deal with them in counseling all the time. They're 10 times smarter than a lot of the people that did graduate. I've got a friend that makes about $150,000 a year. He got through about second year high school, and he's always feeling embarrassed around his college graduate friends who are starving. You know. Now, I'm not talking against education. I have been highly educated myself, almost ad nauseum. But I went back for postgraduate and got degrees in education from the state of Texas and the whole bit. And I think I love to learn, and I love to go to school, and I continue learning all the time. Learning is wonderful. Learning, the experience of learning, knowing for the sake of knowing, that's wonderful. But when it is so competitive, when it becomes so pressurized, then I'm not sure it really achieves what we're after. Carl Rogers and a number of associates did a study on creativity at the University of Chicago. And there were artists there, there were psychologists there, there were social workers, people who had studied creativity, and they studied creativity. What are the conditions that best produce creativity, was their question. What are the inner conditions and what are the outer conditions? Now, one of the inner conditions was kind of what we talked about last week, the lack of critical judgment. Because see, when I say you are bad or you are that's rotten or da-da-da-da, immediately a person becomes defensive. And when I'm defensive, I use all my energy to fight or flight. What Carl Rogers and his people found is that the number one condition to produce creative people or creativity was complete security. The absence of threat. The absence of pressure. Now, I think of that and think of yourself back in school. I went to the University of Toronto and we only wrote one exam a year. I mean, that was it. And I was in what was called an honors program. And we would walk in these huge halls. You didn't even have a name. You had a number. Because your professor who taught you didn't grade the exams to make it fair, supposedly. And I can remember one exam where two other people in my class were ahead of me. The first girl passed out cold when she saw the exam, and the second one threw up. And then they handed me my exam. And that's real fun, waiting for your exam with your fellow classmates dropping off. Now, you know, I'm sure that's not a typical scene, but the pressure. And hey, I was a straight A. I led my course. I was a valedictorian at Toronto. I mean, I knew how to play that game. But I still think it's a crazy game. And so our little kids go to school where they've been loved and beloved at home, and suddenly they're thrown into this competitive thing. Or the other extreme has been the reaction to that, which is the free school. And now you just do what you want. If you want to spit, you know, on your desk, that's fine. And the funny story about that in the free school tradition is the kid who goes to school and says, do we have to do what we want today? You know, and that's a wonderful example, because there's a certain point when kids finally, you see, need to begin to move out of a world where the product of their work is through play and fantasy. That's important. Play is to a child what planning and blueprints are to an adult. We learn by adapting. We adapt by accommodating, which is by imitating, and by assimilating, which is by symbolic play. Children play act. They push little baby buggies and they play with cash registers, sort of preparing themselves for their roles in life. And we found in therapy a thing called role playing. And there's some techniques there's a technique in neurolinguistic programming now called future pacing. Close your eyes and you imagine yourself in the situation. Let's say you need to have confidence and security. You think of a time when you were confident, and you make an anchor. You make a kinesthetic anchor on your fingers. You think of a time when you had security, and you go through the scene and do that. And then holding the anchor, you imagine yourself going through the future scene. It's an example of fantasy play. So that has a value. We don't want to give it up. But there is a point where you do need to learn the times tables, and you do need to learn the things, we all needed to learn the things that would prepare us for their survival in the practical world. And kids want to be workers. They want to learn numbers. They want to seriate. And Piaget tells us at about 7 or 8 there's a jump that the mind makes. And it's a very important jump. And one of the things he does is an experiment where they take 2 balls of clay and they show them to a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old. And they say, which one's the biggest? They both say, the 4-year-old and the 8-year-old, they're the same. Then they take 1 ball of clay and make it into a sausage shape. Show it to the 4-year-old. Say, which one's the biggest? Inevitably, 4-year-olds will say, sausage ball. Because they, as yet, cannot think logically, reverse their thinking. Go back to the beginning and understand that they were both the same. Remember I told you last week, the child from 3 to 6, the mind is more like a slide projector. The moon is high because there is no sun, because it's very high. I mean, it doesn't quite jive, but that's the way the child thinks. Now, the 8-year-old will say they're both the same, because he, she can go back and come back. That's why at about 7 or 8, many children stop believing in Santa Claus. Because they've been, you know, they've been to Foley's and they've been to Neiman's and they've been to Sackler. And they're going, wait a minute. But see, prior to that, they're still magical. There's that magicalness, and you can't talk someone out of that. I remember one time with John Jr. telling him a story. He was laying there beside me, and he said, Daddy, don't put any monsters in this. Don't put any dragons. Don't put any trolls. You know, pretty wise. Give me a good story. It's time to go to bed. I don't want to be upset. And I said, oh, there aren't any monsters, there aren't any trolls, all that's just pretend. And he was about 4, and he says, yeah, just don't do it anyway. I mean, it's something that's, it's magical. They're magical. So we go to school, and we're ready to learn, to group things and to seriate. One of the best examples I know of a 4-year-old and 8-year-olds, you can ask a 4-year-old, do you have a brother? And he'll say yes, and then ask him if his brother has a brother, and he'll say no. Because he can't do the reversible thinking yet. 8-year-olds can't. So we go to school and we begin to learn tools. Now, the tragic thing that happens, and I think even Piaget does this too much, is focuses on logical thinking. We now have all this evidence on the right brain, the right hemisphere of the brain, which thinks in pictures. So we need to be fantasizing. We need to be using this other part of the brain, but people scarcely ever do. And there is a sense in which our education has been highly left-brained and logical and oriented toward memorization. And also, one of the most awful things, I think, about school is that we test intelligence only in terms of left brain. You know, somebody once said, John Holt once said in a book called How Children Fail, that the true test of intelligence is not what you know how to do, but what you do when you don't know what to do. And just think about that. It's not what you know how to do, it's what you do when you don't know what to do. And it's when you don't have anything memorized. then you can get sort of that raw native creativity or intelligence of a person. Or the other statement the other thing that I think is important is to realize that schools and prisons are the only place in the world where time is more important than the job to be done. If we all headed for New York tonight, and you got there 4 hours ahead of me, I don't fail New York. Think about it. But if two kids who are 7 years old don't learn a certain amount of material in 9 months, one of them, in some systems, fails. You see how bad that is in terms of maturation? They may not be maturing at the same rate. And that's why a lot of the really dynamic schools vertically group children rather than horizontally group them. That is, they put children in terms of the abilities that they show they can do, rather than demanding that every 7-year-old, 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old can do the same thing. So it's very important then that we look at the issue of schools and environments. And again, for those of you who may be looking at this program for the first time, the point here isn't, the point may be to go out and fight the battle with the schools. That may be one of the points. But the more important point that I'm trying to make, that these programs are about you. They're about your journey. They're about where you've come from, where you are now, and where you're going. And the schools have had an important place in your life. I tell you, in my counseling, it's unbelievable the number of people that have been seriously affected by schools, by some teacher saying, you're not as smart as your sister, or you're never going to be as smart as your brother, or, you know, you have a good personality, Martha, you know, with the other implication, you're defunct in schoolwork. And, you know, then here's this person being indicted by that for the rest of their life. So Erikson says what needs to be developed here is industry. And see, we could provide schools where every single child could have success experiences. There's absolutely no reason why our elementary schools cannot provide environments where every single person up till they're 10 or 12 years old can have a number of success experiences. And one of the things that I'm very greatly laud is the Houston Independent School District some years ago made the good self-image of the child the #1 goal of elementary school education. You see, and I just think that's wonderful because what it's saying is that without that good self-esteem, I taught in Rice University. I saw brilliant people who had terrible self-esteem, who were socially, that isn't just Rice, it's any place, but often very intellectual people, but who were socially in bad shape, in my opinion, emotionally not conforming, and you know, the brooding genius who withdraws from the world. So it's not so much that you just know a lot of stuff. There's more to it than that. This sense of industry is a sense of worth. Competence, this ego strength of competence, is a sense that I know that I have the power to start something and finish it. And I may not be able to do what one of you can do. See, and there's so much in competitiveness of comparing yourself to everyone else. What I've been trying to say in this series is that these ego strengths are normative in a sense, but there really isn't any normal person. Because if there's a normal person, then they're the norm. Got it? Who wants to be the norm? Who wants to be the one that we all should imitate? I don't like that at all, because that militates against our uniqueness and our individuality. In the company that I consult, Texas General Resources, we use a test, Roger Berkman's test, which does not measure normalcy. It measures needs, but in polarities. It says everyone is unique. Everyone is different. Now, I believe that our education needs to take that into consideration. It may be that everybody could have success experiences, and it may be that everybody shouldn't go on to college, highfalutin academic work. That requires a special kind of interest and a special kind of passion and commitment. It may be that that's just, and if we'd stop making it, you know, normative, you're not getting it right if you haven't gone to college. I mean, here's what you do if you want to get it right. I think there's some real bad stuff that comes about because of that. So You know, take a look at yourself. Where are you with that? You don't have to take that on. Because you didn't make straight A's in school, you don't have to think, I'm not an okay person. Every single one of you know how to start something and know how to finish it. Every single one of you have strengths. When I get with a group of people, it amazes me the talents and the strengths that are in this group of people. Something a person can do that they don't think is important. And when you see it, you just go, wow. Or sometimes sharing dreams is one of the most powerful things I've ever seen. That a room like this, what will come out of your dreams will be some of the most beautiful poetry and some of the most beautiful symbolic images and the most unbelievable combinations of things that we've ever seen. You know, isn't that amazing? And that's coming out of my mind and your mind. But you see, once you believe that you're a D student or a C student, then you think of that as pretty poor. That's what it says on the report card. Fair. You're just fair. Ooh, that's terrible stuff, folks. So if that is what's happened to you along the way, remember that's not true. You are utterly unique. There's never been anyone else like you. The poet says, what I do is me, for that I came. I'm the universe from a particular point of view. My destiny is to find out how I manifest the universe in a way no one else ever has. In order to do that, I have to make choices, and I have to decide that I'm not going to take the rap from my elementary school or my high school. I'm not going to do that anymore. That I'm going to decide to make choices to be who I am and to discover who I am. And every researcher alive says that every single person can change. It's possible to change. You see, what is at stake here is you and your life, your one and only life. You can change that life if you want to. The choice is yours.